At 80, Ritchie Blackmore has finally spoken out, and the revelation about David Coverdale has sent shockwaves through the world of rock music. For decades, fans speculated about the tension, the unspoken rivalry, and the creative clashes between these two legends. But no one had ever heard the story directly from Blackmore himself until now. Known for his fiery guitar riffs and uncompromising personality, Ritchie has always been a man who valued artistry over diplomacy, leaving much of his personal conflicts hidden behind a wall of silence. The truth he reveals is far more complex than fans imagined. It's not merely about artistic differences or clashing egos, it's about pride, ambition, and the fierce, often isolating demands of rock stardom. Blackmore speaks candidly about the moments when collaboration turned into conflict, when respect collided with rivalry, and when the pressures of fame strained even the strongest bonds. Behind the music, behind the albums, and behind the legendary performances, there were tensions that shaped careers and altered the course of rock history. This story is not just a revelation about two musicians, it's a glimpse into the hidden struggles of artistic greatness, the costs of uncompromising talent, and the complicated human dynamics that the public rarely sees. Ritchie Blackmore's long silence has ended, and the truth about David Coverdale is finally out raw honest and unforgettable. Ritchie Blackmore has never been a man to mince words, but for decades he remained silent about his complex relationship with David Coverdale. To the public, their collaboration in Deep Purple and the early days of Whitesnake seemed like the natural meeting of two formidable talents, one a guitarist whose riffs defined a generation, the other a singer whose voice could soar effortlessly above stadium-sized crowds. But behind the music, the camaraderie often hid tension, pride, and moments of quiet conflict that shaped both men's careers in ways few understood. Blackmore recalls the early days with a mix of admiration and frustration. Coverdale's voice was undeniable, a gift that could carry entire songs with emotion and power. Yet, Ritchie's perfectionism and uncompromising vision often collided with Coverdale's own instincts. Rehearsals, which should have been creative spaces, sometimes became arenas of silent competition. It wasn't about malice, Ritchie explains now, decades later. It was about craft. We both wanted to create the best music possible, and sometimes that meant clashing. Those clashes, he admits, were rarely public, but their impact lingered long after the amps were turned off. The pressures of fame amplified every disagreement. Deep Purple had already achieved legendary status, and expectations for every performance, every album, were astronomical. Fans expected perfection, and both men felt that weight intensely. Any compromise felt like weakness. Ritchie often found himself retreating into his music, letting the guitar express frustrations he could not put into words. Meanwhile, Coverdale, equally driven, sought affirmation for his contributions, longing to leave his own mark on songs that sometimes felt dominated by Blackmore's vision. Financial success and public acclaim did little to soften the tension. On paper, it looked like a dream collaboration. Two legends, cutting-edge albums, sold-out tours. In reality, the constant proximity, the pressure to perform flawlessly, and the clashing personalities created an undercurrent of strain. Every chord, every note was weighed against the other's expectations, each interaction carrying the invisible weight of past disagreements. To outsiders, it may have seemed that they simply didn't get along. But Ritchie emphasizes that it was more nuanced, mutual respect mixed with rivalry, admiration tempered by pride. Ritchie also acknowledges the role of his own temperament. Known for his intense focus and occasional reclusiveness, he admits that his dedication to perfection often made collaboration difficult. "I was never easy to work with," he says bluntly. "I demanded more than most could give, not out of spite, but because I believed music deserved it." Coverdale, he explains, had his own standards, his own sense of musical integrity. The collision of two uncompromising spirits was inevitable. Despite the tension, moments of synergy existed, performances where the music seemed to transcend personal differences, where riffs and vocals aligned perfectly to create something timeless. Those moments, Ritchie reflects, are what kept the collaboration alive, what made the struggles worthwhile. But they were fleeting, often overshadowed by unspoken resentments and minor conflicts that grew quietly into larger issues. For decades, Fans speculated about the relationship between these two rock icons, but the truth remained buried beneath interviews, press releases, and public appearances. Now, at 80, Ritchie Blackmore finally chooses to speak not with bitterness, but with clarity. He recounts the tension, the creative battles, and the fleeting moments of harmony that defined his connection with David Coverdale. The story is not one of personal animosity alone. It is the story of two extraordinary artists striving to create greatness. Even when the price is emotional strain and unspoken conflict, and for the first time, the world can hear it directly from him. After the early days of collaboration, Ritchie Blackmore began to feel the weight of expectations not just from fans but from himself. Every album, every tour, carried the pressure to surpass what had come before. Working alongside David Coverdale, a vocalist whose talent was undeniable, intensified that pressure. While Blackmore's guitar defined the sound of Deep Purple and later shaped the early Whitesnake era, he often felt an internal struggle, the need to balance his vision with Coverdale's artistry. It was a delicate, sometimes impossible dance. Blackmore recalls countless studio sessions where silence spoke louder than words. Tension would build over arrangements, over phrasing, over subtle interpretations of songs. Coverdale, for his part, had his own ideas about expression and melody. The result was a creative friction that could ignite brilliance or frustration. "We were both stubborn," Ritchie admits now. "Neither of us wanted to compromise on something we felt was right." That's how legends are made. But it's also how tempers flare. Even small disagreements could linger for hours, sometimes days. Before music once again became the shared language that bridged the gap, touring amplified everything. Long hours on the road, constant performances, and minimal personal space made small conflicts feel larger than they were. A missed cue or a slight miscommunication could escalate into tension behind closed doors. Fans saw the polished performances on stage, but never the behind-the-scenes strain that accompanied them. For Ritchie, the guitar became both a shield and a voice, allowing him to express emotions he could not always articulate to Coverdale or anyone else. Financial and professional stakes only heightened the situation. Each album and each show represented more than art. It was livelihood, reputation, and legacy. Mistakes were magnified, and compromises felt like concessions to mediocrity. Blackmore's pursuit of perfection often left little room for patience, while Coverdale's own pride and sensitivity meant that creative disagreements could feel deeply personal. Yet through all of it, both men recognized the brilliance they could achieve together. Even when the journey was fraught with tension, despite the friction, Ritchie emphasizes the moments of profound synergy. When the riffs and vocals aligned perfectly, the results were transcendent. Songs like Burn and Mistreated were more than compositions. They were conversations between two artists pushing each other to excel. In those moments, the rivalry faded, replaced by mutual recognition and the exhilarating joy of creating music that would endure. Those fleeting instances were what made the struggles bearable, what made the collaboration worthwhile, and what cemented the enduring respect between them. Over time, Ritchie also began to reflect on his own temperament and how it affected their working relationship. Known for his intense focus, exacting standards, and occasional volatility, he admits he could be difficult to collaborate with. "I expected a lot," he says candidly. "Sometimes too much. But that was the only way I knew how to make music that mattered." Coverdale, Ritchie notes, had his own strengths and demands, which at times made compromise difficult but ultimately raised the quality of their work. The interplay of two uncompromising spirits, Ritchie now realizes, was both the source of conflict and the engine of creativity. Looking back, Blackmore acknowledges that public perception often oversimplified their relationship. Fans speculated about animosity, while the reality was far more nuanced: mutual respect, personal pride, and a shared desire to create unforgettable music. Their collaboration was not free from conflict, but it was precisely that tension that produced some of rock's most iconic songs. At 80. Reflecting on decades of music and memory, Ritchie Blackmore can finally speak openly. The story of his relationship with David Coverdale is one of brilliance, friction, and the complicated human dynamics that lie behind legendary music. It is a story of two artists whose drive for perfection shaped not only their music, but also the emotional terrain of their partnership. As the years progressed, The working relationship between Ritchie Blackmore and David Coverdale became a complex mix of admiration, rivalry, and occasional distance. Touring and recording demanded relentless energy, and both men were determined to leave a lasting mark on rock music. Yet the pressures of collaboration, fame, and personal ambition. Ritchie admits that part of the challenge stemmed from their shared commitment to excellence. Both men demanded more than mediocrity from themselves and, inevitably, from each other. David had a voice that could move mountains, Ritchie reflects. But I had a vision in my head for the music and I wasn't willing to settle for anything less. Sometimes those two things clashed. The conflicts were rarely personal, but pride and passion often made them feel that way. Behind closed doors, words went unsaid, and small disagreements accumulated into a quiet, persistent tension. Touring amplified these pressures. Long flights, late-night shows, and relentless schedules left little room for reflection or relaxation. Blackmore often retreated into his guitar, using music as both expression and escape. Coverdale, equally passionate, sought validation and recognition for his contributions. The collision of two strong personalities, both committed to greatness, created moments of friction that would later become the subject of speculation among fans. Publicly, they performed flawlessly, but behind the scenes, every chord and melody carried the invisible weight of their artistic struggle. Despite the tension, Blackmore never lost respect for Coverdale. He recognizes that the singer's talent pushed him to excel, and that many of the iconic songs they produced were born from this very friction. The relationship was symbiotic, even if it was occasionally volatile. The intensity of their interactions, Ritchie reflects, was inseparable from the brilliance of the music they created. Without it, the magic of Deep Purple and early Whitesnake might never have existed. Blackmore also acknowledges the role of time in reshaping perspective. Decades later, the conflicts that once seemed insurmountable now feel like essential parts of their shared history. Looking back, it's clear that the tension was never about hatred, he says. It was about commitment, drive, and the need to push each other to our limits. That's how great music happens. The moments of discord, though difficult at the time, were catalysts for creativity and growth. Over the years, public speculation painted a picture of rivalry and personal animosity that, according to Ritchie, oversimplified reality. Their story was not one of personal vendetta, but of two artists navigating the pressures of fame and the pursuit of excellence. The collaboration produced both iconic albums and intense behind-the-scenes friction. For Blackmore, understanding and acknowledging that complexity has been a lifelong process. At 80, he finally feels ready to speak candidly about the years spent with Coverdale. The story is not merely one of tension or conflict. It is a tale of two extraordinary musicians striving for greatness, shaped as much by their differences as by their shared brilliance. Blackmore's reflections reveal a nuanced portrait of artistry, pride, and human connection, a testament to the sacrifices and struggles that lie behind legendary music. Even after decades, the echoes of those years remain, and Blackmore's perspective sheds light on the balance of respect and rivalry that defined his relationship with David Coverdale. It is a story of music passion and the human complexities that fueled one of rock's most unforgettable collaborations. By the time Ritchie Blackmore reached the later years of his career, the turbulence of his collaboration with David Coverdale had settled into memory, yet its impact remained vivid. The fire of creation, the moments of friction, and the unspoken tensions had all left their mark, not only on the music they made, but on the men themselves. Blackmore reflects on those years with a sense of clarity and, surprisingly, gratitude. What once felt like conflict is now understood as the engine that drove their artistic excellence. Every disagreement, every clash of vision, pushed them further toward the music they both sought to perfect. Ritchie recalls the late nights in the studio, the debates over riffs, arrangements, and vocal phrasing, as both exhausting and exhilarating. The intensity could feel isolating, and at times he wondered if the collaboration was sustainable. Coverdale's unwavering commitment to his own vision often mirrored Blackmore's own, creating a dynamic that required patience, diplomacy, and above all, endurance. Yet it was precisely this tension that produced songs and performances that still resonate decades later. The friction, Ritchie admits, was inseparable from the creative magic they achieved together. Looking back, Blackmore emphasizes that the story of their relationship has been misunderstood by the public. Media narratives painted rivalry as animosity, and fans speculated endlessly about personal grudges. In truth, their connection was more nuanced, a combination of respect, challenge, and the occasional clash of strong personalities. Neither man sought to diminish the other. Both sought to elevate the music. That ambition, intense and uncompromising, often manifested as conflict, but it was never born from malice. Blackmore also acknowledges the personal growth that came from those years. Navigating the complexities of collaboration taught him patience, perspective, and the value of listening, even when instinct demanded otherwise. He admits he could be difficult, exacting, and at times unyielding, but he also learned that Coverdale's dedication, his own adaptability, and the shared goal of creating great music were forces capable of transforming tension into art. Those lessons, Blackmore reflects, are as enduring as the songs themselves. In speaking publicly at 80, Ritchie offers more than a reflection. He provides context, clarity, and honesty. He recounts both the brilliance and the challenges of working with Coverdale, acknowledging the struggles without diminishing the successes. It is a story that balances artistry and humanity, showing how the pursuit of perfection can test relationships, temper egos, and ultimately produce something timeless. For Blackmore, sharing this perspective is not about settling old scores, it is about honoring the truth behind the music and the people who helped make it unforgettable. The years have softened the edges of conflict, allowing Blackmore to appreciate the collaboration for what it was, a partnership defined by talent, ambition, and mutual drive. Every riff, every vocal line, and every song carried the imprint of both men's dedication and personality. The tension that once seemed burdensome now appears essential and necessary, ingredient in the creation of legendary music. Ultimately, Ritchie Blackmore's story of working with David Coverdale is one of passion, challenge, and respect. It is a candid account of two extraordinary artists navigating the pressures of fame, creativity, and personal pride. And while the clashes and disagreements were real, the music that emerged stands as proof that brilliance often arises from complexity, not simplicity. At 80, Blackmore finally breaks his silence, offering the world insight into a collaboration that shaped rock history and revealing the human dynamics that fueled it all.